Tonight, once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police says a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect. He was in pajamas and latex gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Philip J. Fry, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
Just like every other podcast. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Drunk Turkey Show. I'll say thank you for everybody that's tuning in. Please hit that like and subscribe button. Ring that notification bell if you haven't done so already. I know we've had a little bit of a shuffling of a couple of days. If you guys aren't aware, I do cover my favorite football team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have a different channel, a couple of different channels, actually. State of the Steelers on YouTube and Still Current Network. I am affiliated with those guys. I come out live on Mondays. Go check them out if you guys want to see me there. And this past Friday, Steelers had a game. I had to cover it. I had to talk about it. I had to report about it. So you guys can go and check those things out and what comes out about that on Monday on Still Current Network. So make sure you go check, like, subscribe, especially if you're a Steelers fan. But back to today, we have an interview today, one that I was excited to have a couple of days ago. Some stuff came up, and we'll get into what that stuff was, and we had to postpone it to today. She goes by Jasmine. Her channel is Forensic Frenzy. Jasmine, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's been it feels like a while since the last time I got on here because of the extended break, so to speak. So I'm refreshed and ready to rock and roll. How's your week?
Hasn't been too shabby. I have a little bit of an electrical issue going on in half of my house, but other than that, went off without a hitch.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, hopefully this electrical issue continues to improve and it gets taken care of to its fullest. So you're Forensic Frenzy. Where does the name come from? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background a little bit.
Sure. So in 2012, I graduated. I had gone to college for criminal justice, but it was a very specific portion of criminal justice. It covered forensic investigations. So it would have made you ready to be a crime scene technician leaving out of college. A couple years later, I returned. I got my bachelor, different school, but I got my bachelor's degree of science in criminal justice. So the overall justice system for criminals, be it juveniles or adults. So we covered both juvenile justice as well as, the adult justice system. And then a few years ago, when this actually happened, fall of 22, I was going into my first semester for forensic psychology. So I had just started school when it would have been there. Kaylee and Maddie's last semester. And then this whole thing happened. So I was drawn into what kind of person would do this because I was, doing school for forensic psychiatry. It just started. And one of my very first assignments was literally that. What kind of person would have done that to those students? Aside from, when I say first assignment, I mean aside from quizzes and tests and stuff like that. So toward the end where midterms were going on is when all of this actually happened. And our first assignment actually became what kind of person, try to profile the individual. And then our next assignment, our first assignment of the next semester was actually right after Bryan was arrested. And it was does Mr. Kohberger fit this? And I did pretty well on both assignments, but I would say looking backward now, I was wrong. So forensic comes just from my educational background in general. I've never been a detective. I have never been a cop. I've been pretty open about that. I just chose this for my educational studies, actually.
Got you. So, initially saying that you were wrong, then at that point, when Bryan Kohberger was initially arrested, based on the profile that you had created before his arrest, you felt that he didn't match. Is that correct?
So I had gone down the route that all the routes that everyone else had, from November 13th up until maybe just a little bit before mid-December. So I'm chasing like the guy at the grub truck and all the Jacks and the Jakes and, everything, the Davids, and I'm chasing all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then I'm also in the Facebook groups and on Reddit. So I'm experiencing Papa Roger as well, who sparked my interest. And I'm kind of wondering all along, do any of these people that I'm looking into fit this Papa Roger character? And I'm trying to figure out if one of them is this person, who would it be? And then a few weeks later, the police arrested Bryan. Looking back on the profile, I had assumed that the person would be cold, callous, meticulous. I didn't assume that they were anyone that was nearly these kids' age. But I did assume that they would have some kind of I don't know how I want to say it. Some kind of issue with blending in with society, fitting into society, some kind of social
awkwardness
skill that's not there, or a lack of a skill that's just not there, something that needs to be refined, something that would stand out about the person. Then I saw Bryan and I was like, I don't know if that's the guy. I don't even know if this could be the person that I thought was Papa Roger, to be totally honest with you. Like, my arguments with Papa Roger got really vicious and out of control. I had to report Papa Roger plenty of times. I am proudly going to say I'm pretty sure I'm part of the reason why he was kicked out of the Facebook group. So I thought, when I saw Bryan, I'm like, there's no way that's like, I already thought that no one else that I had looked into could be the person. But then I'm like, there's no way that this is the guy that knew all the details and was talking crap to everyone online. Like, no way. And now he seems so domicile. Just, there's nothing there. He just seems like plain. And yet this person that was talking online was brazen. So I actually think I may have profiled him well for what the prosecution is saying he is now. But at the time, I don't think so. No, I didn't think it was that.
Right. And I think that a big component that is there is more information has come out since then. Initially, I wouldn't say that I thought that Bryan Kohberger was ever innocent. I will say that there was a part where, and videos out there, you can go back and watch them, where I thought to myself, I don't know. I thought that the PCA initially was poorly written. I can kind of say to a certain extent, I still feel that way. I think I understand a little bit more. As we spoke before the show started, I was in law enforcement, but my law enforcement career was many, many years ago. And technology has changed significantly since then. And I was never like a detective or an investigator, or any of those type of things. So those type of techniques or tools evade me. Those aren't, part of my repertoire when it comes to like looking at this. And to be 100% honest with everybody, I just look at this from a, in my opinion, a logical, try to be common sensual perspective, so to speak. And initially, I had a lot of questions, and a lot of it came from the probable cause. Like, they put out there something to the effect like, oh, on the 14th, he connected to a tower in Moscow, but they don't think he was there. But they didn't go into what that meant for the probable cause affidavit. Come to find out later, what that probably means is that they were able to determine, that based on the signal strength of his phone and how long it took from his phone to connect to the tower that he was connected to in Moscow, that although it was connecting to a tower in Moscow, he wasn't physically there. He was still somewhere outside of the Moscow city limits. And, I think that goes to some sort of a testament to accuracy of the locations. And we'll get into those things a little bit further on. But there was that aspect. There was the aspect of where Payne said something to the effect that when the suspect left the King Road neighborhood, that he potentially could have gone right because that was the fastest route towards Pullman. And I was like, well, why is that even in here? The potential that he could have gone this way, if you guys are going to allege later on that he was over here at this other location. And I think what they were trying to say was that there was multiple ways that he could have gotten out of there. And I think that's what he attested to when he testified. But it was poorly written and, in the manner in which he was trying to explain that. So I thought at a certain point, not necessarily that he was innocent, but I thought that, maybe there's more to this. Maybe, it sounds like they were in over their head a little bit. Things of that nature. But I think the FBI has come in and really took over on this case, especially when you realized the hand that they played into capturing him. I mean, they're the ones that handed him on a silver platter. It is what it is. When in your coverage, did you have Forensic Frenzy as a channel when Bryan Kohberger was arrested, or did that come a little bit afterwards?
So when Bryan Kohberger was arrested, I was actually I was Forensic Frenzy on Twitter, right? So I wasn't here. I wasn't in this space.
Gotcha.
But the first 8 months, until about August of 2023, I had held on to some of my discrepancies that I had from the PCA. Okay. And I was listening to Bryan when he said that he was eager to be exonerated and, things like that. And again, on the surface, now looking back, I know I was wrong. So on the surface, he doesn't look like the kind of person that would be like on the internet arguing with anyone, but evidently he may be that kind of person. And, so now looking back, it's like, you may have let the actual being misconstrue your judgment. So I think that for a very long time, I just looked at the person and I literally could not let it go. And then he was saying things like, I'm eager to be exonerated. So I couldn't let it go. I actually did believe that they had the wrong person. I thought that there had to have been some kind of overlap, connection, something that would explain DNA being in the home and then possibly being transferred to the sheath. I went through all the things that everyone else did. So when people tell me that I'm a guilter and that I don't understand where the Bryan Kohberger is innocent crowd comes from, I literally laugh because I actually was a part of that crowd. So it's literally, I can't even argue with someone who's less fortunate than to know, but I was a part of that crowd. So I held on when he told us that he had an alibi. I listened when he said that he was going to prove that he was somewhere else. I understood when he said that he was going to provide witnesses as well as cross-examine witnesses, and I was still holding on. But I think it was sometime around the waiver of speedy trial that Bryan lost me. I just felt like if he had been innocent like he told me, that there was no way that he was going to waive his right to a speedy trial. They clearly didn't have everything that they needed at that time to convict him, and it would have been a very advantageous point to try to take it to trial and know that they were not going to be prepared. So he lost me there. A couple months later, November 23, I started my channel. And by then I had already been speaking with literally whoever would speak, including any neighbor that was like an actual permanent residential neighbor and had nothing to do with the college out there. So at that point, I was pretty well and convinced through not just Bryan's own actions, but inactions in court, I guess, but some of the other things that he was probably at least involved. I started my channel with, was he simply just an accomplice? My channel has, if you were ever there in the beginning and you're here now watching this, then you know that my channel has changed its mind. I started with, was he the accomplice? Then I transformed into, okay, is there an accomplice and he's the freaking mastermind? Like, what is going on? I've been lost this whole time, right along with you guys. And probably, I don't know, January 24, my channel started being noticed by other people. I got in with some creators who were able to reach like families and stuff like that. And it wasn't until I first contacted Garrett Discovery back in April of this year that I actually spoke to any families or anything like that. So I had been well and convinced, as well as pushing it on my YouTube channel, that Bryan Kohberger was more than likely guilty long before I actually started speaking to the families, based off his own actions or inactions, whichever you want to call them, and coupled with some of the things that I was digging out of the documents.
No, I understand all that. For me, the phone, his phone activity, the fact that he turned it off or wasn't connected to the towers during that specific hour, on an icy cold, cloudy night, freezing temperatures, it was below freezing, and his phone was off. It was the biggest thing that held me to, I thought he had more than likely did something in this case early on. The DNA.
Can I just play off that super quick before I forget? I don't have an iPhone. It is a really expensive phone, but it's not an iPhone. I have an Android. And at 3 a.m., my phone, I can turn it off, but I don't. At 3 a.m., my phone resets. And any updates that need to happen. And it doesn't turn back on until it's done. So I was a little suspicious of the phone being off, but I remained aware of that. And it did play a role in why I believed him at first. Got you.
Yeah, for me, I just thought that was too big of a coincidence. That's what made me think, because the DNA, Howard Bloom, who's been on the show, I'm a fan of his, actually have his book and read the entire thing. Had him on the show a couple of times. But he wrote in the Airmail article that something to the effect that the DNA that was on the sheath had to be sent to a lab, and that the lab had to find it, and then it went through this whole process of the genetic genealogy stuff. And to me, when he said that it was a very small, degraded amount, had to be found in some crazy manner, I thought that was going to be a big question mark. I thought that wasn't gonna fly. Now, once the result came back that it was 1 in 5 octillion times, whatever, that led me to believe that small, whatever, how much DNA it was, probably was not as small as one would think, or technology has come a long way for the ability to, identify somebody with even that small amount of DNA. Now, I went back and paired it off with the probable cause affidavit. The probable cause affidavit doesn't bring up, Othram. Now, if Othram was the lab that actually discovered the DNA on the sheath, it would have definitely had to have been in the probable cause or documented and logged in chain of custody. And if it wasn't, then we would have already heard that piece of evidence being thrown out. That wouldn't have been something that Ann Taylor's holding on and waiting for until the last moment to say, hey, this is what happened. No, this is real life. So, that information, that sheath, I went back and I read the probable cause affidavit. I'll be honest, I probably read through it the first couple of times a little too fast, and going back and seeing that, no, it was actually the Idaho State Lab that discovered the DNA and entered it into CODIS. So however much there was there, it was enough to enter it into CODIS and not come up with a match with anybody. And that what Othram was doing the IgG stuff until the FBI got involved and took over for him. But I think that could have been Well, I understand why that wasn't in the PCA. They didn't want to go down the IGG route. It's just kind of like one of the big arguments that Bryan Kohberger's defense team has right now. I'm not saying it's a good argument, but it's one of their arguments. But when that came back as the 5 octillion, whatever the case may be, that was the moment when I said, all right, this guy's phone is off and his DNA is at the same car matches his without a front license plate. What are all the chances of this, being coincidental? It's just too huge for me in that sense. Real quick, Justin Oki coming with a $2 super chat. Thank you so much. So the alibi for you is kind of when it started, the lack of a speedy trial. What made you think that? Let's fast forward from that. So you mentioned something earlier when you said what kind of person could committed this crime? Who could have done it? Now, there's a few things that we know now, that have probably changed since then. One, we know that the person went in there silently. There's audio 50 feet away. We know that there was no forced entry. We don't hear any sounds of emotion. We don't hear somebody screaming out of rage, whether it be out of, roid rage or angry jealousy. We don't hear, there's no sounds of victims screaming either. There's sounds of whimpers and maybe voices, but nothing loud. No sounds of kicking or banging or struggle for life. What are your thoughts on the person that could have committed this crime, knowing those things and also knowing they didn't leave any DNA behind?
Now or then?
Now.
So I initially started with it must have been super meticulous. Now I actually believe that it was a complete disaster. I do believe it was relatively quiet, yes. But nonetheless, I don't believe that this person had any knowledge or skill of how to do so. And I think that they were maintained in keeping themselves quiet. I think that they were lucky enough to find one victim that remained asleep because she was the first. I think that they failed to keep the second victim in the first room quiet because there was some kind of cry out. And apparently at that point, they quieted her. So I think it was a disaster. From downstairs, I think it was a disaster because that's where the crying and the male is talking and everything has gotten even worse on the second floor as far as noise goes. So for me, although there was minimal noise, there was still too much noise for this to be as meticulous as I thought. So it must have been a wreck. That's where I'm at now.
Got you. Yeah, I mean, you make some valid points there. I think you make valid points. But for me, I agree. I think that there was a little bit of array. I don't think everything went to plan, obviously, and I think that a lot of mistakes happened during the process of the actual incident. I think that when you look at the fact that there's no DNA in his car, you look at his history, but you see for instance, the Linda Lane footage, and you pair it up with the PCA, where after 4:00 and he starts to drive weird, and I think this is because at that moment it's go time. He up to that point he drove around 3 times around that apartment complex. On that 4th attempt, he stops in front of, I think, apartment 507, backs up, turns back around, goes back in front of the house and corner of the PCA, which I'm sure that, there's probably some video of this, even though we don't see it from the Linda Lane footage because it's about 100 yards away. But according to PCA, once he comes back into view where it was near the residence, it attempts to either park or do another turnaround in front of the house. It fails to do so. It continues on and goes to the King Queen Road intersection, does a 3-point turn, and then comes back, goes all the way back around. You can see it come back around for the 5th time on the Linda Lane footage, and then it parks up in the back. So mistakes were starting to be made. And, I think you make a valid point. If, let's just say, because I think Howard Bloom makes a valid point, he goes in there and goes straight up to Maddie's room. I think that's a huge indicator of what, of who, right? Now there's 2 people in there, so automatically that goes against the plan he may have really put out together. And so I think that's why some of the mistakes start getting made. And And I'm not surprised that he got caught based on those mistakes. You know, leaving the sheath behind, leaving the DNA behind. When you being in a study of forensics, how important was that DNA, and what are your thoughts about the size of the DNA? I know I spoke about it a little bit, but the comparison came back, 1 in 5 octillion, I think. What are your thoughts on it, and how it is today? 'Cause my experience in forensics and stuff is over a decade ago.
So billions, the number of people we have in human population, and octillions, right?
Yeah.
Octillions are so much larger. With that being said, the chance of that not being Bryan's DNA is impossible because it covers the octillions, covers every single person on this earth, as well as many, many, many years back of all of our ancestors.
Yeah.
So that's the DNA. What was the other part you asked me about?
Sorry, I muted myself by accident.
Okay.
No, yeah. No, I was just basically asking about like the DNA, and I know you said that you were concerned about it in the past. As a possibility of it being transferred there somehow. It was single source DNA inside the button snap. What made you change your mind that it could have been transferred there by some other means?
So, believe it or not, I believed Bryan, so I believed his attorney when she said in the, how would she say, hundreds of law enforcement officers that were in and out of that place or something like that?
Yeah.
That any single one of them could have transferred this DNA from somewhere else. I know many people believe that Bryan Kohberger did not have an Instagram. That's cool. But when I saw after Bryan Kohberger in the seconds after Moscow Police Department announced his name, there was absolutely an Instagram. It was connected to the two girls. So I kept telling myself that if he knew these two girls, then that would make sense. His DNA could be anywhere. He literally could have given one of them a ride, and maybe there was no one that, left that knows that, like there are a million ways that Bryan could have known someone, interacted with someone, anything. And he also could have simply been the DoorDasher, right? So does he leave the food and then one of these officers collects the DoorDash, collects the sheath, and then they go and process it later, and Bryan's DNA has now been transferred from the DoorDash to the sheath? There's so much so for me, it was definitely his DNA, and it was just a matter of how it got there.
Yeah. I understand that aspect. That also went through my mind as well. I was like, this guy's a teaching assistant in a criminal justice class. Is it possible that he has access to those that have to persons who have access to the criminal lab, or police officers that do? Those things went through my mind, and then you find out that he puts himself out and about in a secluded area, according to himself, in his car. It's not like, for instance, I know a lot of folks bring up this one case where this guy's DNA was under the fingernails of a dead guy and it got there because apparently he touched the doorknob that a paramedic touched the same doorknob who ended up going and assisting with this dead person. The problem is Bryan Kohberger wasn't near anybody that night, according to himself. He was secluded. He was by himself. He was in his vehicle. And I'm going to think that if he is innocent, then those whole glove situation, it would have been something that he'd been doing beforehand. I mean, police literally tried to get his DNA for days, couldn't do so. They ended up having to, be left with his father's DNA to do the comparison. And yet we're also to believe that on this one night that these murders happened, on this cold, icy night, that his DNA just so happened to get on the knife sheath that was being transported by a guy who matches more or less Bryan Kohberger's height and weight, also drives a vehicle very similar to his without a front license plate, and is doing this while Bryan Kohberger is, self-adamantly put himself out and about by himself without any type of evidence of where he was. And so Yeah, interesting stuff there. Now, I know you mentioned, and we'll kind of get into some of those things, but you mentioned the DoorDash driver, and I know that you mentioned the I think I can't remember Twilio, something like
Twilio.
Twilio number. The only thing that my question comes up is because I know that you thought maybe there's the possibility that Bryan Kohberger was a DoorDasher. Is that true?
Yeah. So I used to believe that maybe he could have been the DoorDasher, and then I let it go. But then I
Uh-huh.
found the Twilio number, and it just reignited it. So I just,
Gotcha.
yeah, that's why I asked.
Yeah. Well, just I don't think so, just because it says in the PCA that the DoorDash delivery drivers reported the information about the DoorDash delivery. So I don't even think law enforcement knew about the DoorDash delivery until the DoorDasher came forward and
Mhm.
said that there was a DoorDash delivery there at that house. But yeah, I had seen that. And I thought, w- if he has a second number, what else could that be used for, though? What are those numbers primarily used for outside of Uber, or is that what it is? Uber Eats, Uber delivers, stuff like
So
that.
so let's say either one of us, right? We just talked about owning businesses.
Yeah.
So we're running a business, and instead of our cell phone number, we want
Mhm.
our clients or customers to have like a discrete number where they can still reach our phone at any time, but they don't have to have our actual personal telephone number. So we
Mm,
actually can use this service, but it's literally provided to DoorDash, Uber, Grubhub, Lyft, like stuff like that. Even like the Spark driver, when they send you the text messages, if you get like Walmart Spark orders, but they're assigned to those kinds of people, and it's meant to keep their identities and their phone private from you as well. So when we're going back and forth with that DoorDasher and they're like, hey, we're waiting at the restaurant for your food. Oh, we're on our way. Sorry, it's taking a little bit longer. We're getting those messages from a Twilio number, not from the DoorDasher's number.
interesting. Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, there's a number of reasons why he could be doing that, but yeah, no, that's interesting that there was also the DoorDash there. I see why those dots could be connected. But speaking with, so you had an interview with Andrew Garrett, and we'll get into that.
Mhm.
Um, there was a document that was out there. It was out there for a while. You had come across it. What was that document, and where did you come across it?
Okay. So it was in the Reddit groups apparently for a while, and my viewers were like emailing it to me. But remember, I told you the other day I don't really check that email that
Hmm.
often. So they're emailing it to me, and then one day I just saw it in there, and I saw it a lot. And I was like, ugh, whatever this is, I don't even, like, so I didn't bother with it. But a few weeks later, attorney Andrew Meyer from the law offices of Andrew Meyer about the law here on YouTube,
Hmm.
he actually reached out to me. He sent it to me in an email. And he just said, like, this was given to me by the family, like Kaylee's family. And he was like, I just don't know what it is. And he was literally just asking, like, do you have any idea what this is, how this translates? What am I looking at? I gave him the general synopsis there and left it alone again because, again, I didn't like it. Um, and then a few weeks later in April, I reached out to Garrett Discovery. So I just called the number, like press 0, and thought I got an operator, but it turns out that's not how it works. So I actually got someone who works like, with Discovery and stuff like that. And she's like, yeah, so is it on our website? She's talking to me about it. We had a conversation. And then she said, like, well, if you're really, because I presented, in a manner as such. This is on your website. It's pretty prejudicial. If it's not real, it shouldn't be there. And furthermore, there's like a gag order. So if you guys did work on the case, how are you guys even able to put this out there on the internet and not be violating the gag order? I'm confused. But uh, she ended up saying to me, like, well, can you send me a copy of whatever it is that you're looking at? And then I'm like, well, maybe they did more work than I think they did. And now looking back, I know that that's true because they didn't just do the social media map, they did the cell phone evidence. But anyway, so I'm like, so maybe they did a little more work than I think they did. And I sent her the doc, and she's like, oh, thank you so much. And that was it. But 2 days later, I got an email back. So I think the weekend had passed. So it's like Monday morning. And I get an email back from Mr. Garrett. And he actually provided me like some knowledge as to, I guess, how he ended up working for them. Well, not, he didn't actually work for them because he wasn't paid and he didn't take the job. But so essentially he more or less told me like, don't worry about the gag order because I'm not actually under it. I didn't take any money. I wasn't retained. I don't work for anyone. He did tell me that because he is neutral to the situation and he technically is supposed to report with expertise regardless of who hired him, that he doesn't have like a party that he's in, cahoots with. I was hired by the defense, but regardless of what happens, I'm going to report the truth, or I was hired by the prosecution and regardless of what happens, I'm going to report the truth. So he explained that to me and, told me that he didn't actually end up taking the job. He told me two things back then that stuck with me. The social media map was more than likely real and that the cell phone evidence was going to be problematic for the defense. And then since then, as we've seen it play out in court with all the testimony from everyone, and believe it or not, I actually do believe Cy Ray. It was problematic for the prosecution, and that's why he talked about it. But the Garrett interview more or less explains that what to do to correct it is something that's like a specialty to, it sounds like, actual, I guess, experts is how he tried to explain it. Like, that's not an actual expert, but actual experts have this specialty that can do the work that needs to be done. But he did not deny that Mr. Ray knows exactly what is wrong and just doesn't know how to fix it. But he did say he knows exactly what's wrong. I didn't want to take the interview at first. It was offered to me in April. To be fair, I tried to get it over to Chris McDonough and Karen McDonough. They didn't bite. I never heard back from the defense when I reported the document to them, and I did report it to them first. Believe it or not, I know everyone thinks I'm so against Bryan Kohberger, but in actuality, the first person that I reached out to was Ann Taylor to let her know that that needed to be taken down and that she needed to file some kind of cease and desist because it's making him look like he's guilty. But she never answered me. The message was left with your assistant, Ann, so if you hear this, she may need to be fired. I called the prosecutor's office. They actually did answer. So they listened. They heard me out. They were like, what is that? And then they told me like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to report this to the tip line. So I ended up calling and reporting it to the tip line. I never heard back from anyone.
When did you report? Around what time was this reporting to the tip line?
I'd say the third week of April. So probably a few days after Brian's alibi came out, I called and told Ann that the document existed and that the whole entire thing was going on. And then when she didn't answer me within a few days, I also called the prosecutor's office. And then that day I called the tip line as well. So in between calling the defense and the prosecution, a few days went by, but all in the same week, I ended up calling both sides to let them know. So as far as like everyone not understanding, like, I guess that the document was there, like the prosecution, the defense, whatever, I guess I'm a little, maybe they're behind on tips, but it was there. And it was also relayed to both offices in some facet. So that's just really how I ended up deciding a few months later, just a couple of days ago, that I was going to take the interview. I didn't really know if he was even going to do it. Especially since I called the police on his document, but he did take the interview. And in fairness, it was fully questioned. Like, I had this whole thing worked out and he took over the interview. I mean, I don't mind, but he took over the interview. I don't know if the questions that I even had ready, like not every single one of them would have dug out the information that we ended up getting. So the interview ended up providing more than I actually was seeking, but ultimately he didn't mind speaking. So I just let him talk. I did have questions that came from when people knew that I was going to do the interview. They would send me questions. So I did have people, send me questions, and I asked specific questions for certain people at certain points throughout the interview. But my main goal was to find out, I know that, I think I told you, I thought Kaylee's family had been like given her Instagram account through Legacy, but that's not the case. I asked. It's not. So of all the victims right now, the only Instagram that you can find that's up is Kaylee's. And I assumed her parents and, brothers, sisters had been keeping it active for sentimental purposes, that it had been legacy to them, but it's not true. That's the police. They are keeping Kaylee's Instagram active. And then I was also told that the prosecution was having a really hard time making the social media connection. So those two things together, the Instagram is still up and they're still trying to make the social media connection, led me to want to do the interview. I asked, he accepted, and that was pretty much what he just provided to us. That's why there are some periods where I actually ask a question and other periods where there is no question. It's just what he's saying that you hear. It's because what he's volunteering, there may not have been a question before that.
Right.
We were literally just talking and fluffing it a second ago, and then we jumped into this, and I want you guys to hear what he says. So I cut out the fluff, the in-between stuff. But for the most part, he just took over. He had, a lot on his mind. He put it all out there. I did not in any way just pick and pick and pick until he said those things. He just volunteered them. So.
Yeah. And like Holly says, I suggest downloading that interview because who knows how long it's going to be up. Now you mentioned that the April, third week of April is when you've notified everybody. You did the interview. You didn't hear anything back from anyone until after you did the interview. Is that correct?
Correct.
And
so it was like no one believed me. No one was interested. No one cared what Garrett Discovery had to say. None of that. And the whole time, the Goncalves family is like, there's this document. There's this document. They're telling them over and over and over again. They're ignoring all of us. And it was something about me actually posting the video of the interview. Now everyone's interested. It's got everyone's full attention.
Yeah, I'd actually seen that document some time ago as well. I also speak with the Goncalves family, and Christy had told me that prior to Bryan Kohberger's arrest, this is, on their way, I think, to the celebration of life, right towards the end of the year there in 2022. And right before his arrest happened, they got notified by the police department or law enforcement there that they were going to make an arrest, and that the person that they were arresting was Christopher Kohberger. And they immediately went to his social media. They found, I think they said they found a couple, but they found at least one, I think, that was associated with one of his email addresses. And they had folks that were following back and forth, I believe, that were members of his family. And on there were Maddie and Kaylee, that he was following them. And so to me, when, Bill Thompson came out saying there was no evidence, I went back and listened to it. It sounds like he's alluding that there's no evidence, but I don't think he necessarily directly is saying that, but it does sound like he is saying that there isn't any. I was dumbfounded by that because I was like, well, maybe perhaps it got leaked out somehow that Bryan was going to be arrested. And then I thought, well, maybe there's a situation about timing. Everybody followed those, students after their passing, shortly after. A lot of people did. I did myself. And I was like, well, maybe he's followed them after the fact. But according to your interview there, it sounds like there's the possibility that they followed him back, which would indicate that would have happened before their passing, obviously. Is that how you took that interview?
So I actually took that part of the interview a different way. I think I took it as him saying, well, someone who's deceased can't follow you back. And that's why I asked him, wait a minute, but what if he actually said you can't follow and get a follow back from someone who's deceased. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. What if the profile is public? And then he said, well, then in that case you can. But it's not so much. I don't know if he actually knows that the follow back exists in the follow back list, if that makes any sense to you. Remember, he said There's following and the people that are followed. And I actually think it goes in that order. And they would be in one of the two sections because the girls didn't appear on that list twice. So if they followed back, they should be there twice if they were also followed, if that makes sense to you, because both lists were there. So I don't think he actually had that part like pinpointed in his memory. I know that he's correct in the idea that they were there, but I don't think he remembers exactly where they fell in the document and what part that is. Again, if he's correct about there being following and followed, then that also explains why the document goes A to Z and then starts again alphanumerically 0 to 9 A to Z. It would be followed in numerical and alphabetical order, and then following in numerical and alphabetical order, or vice versa. So the two girls only exist in one portion of that. It's either this or it's that, but I don't think it's both.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I'd like to see the result of it. I know it ended up not being completely completed, right? He hasn't verified things and stuff like that.
Yes. So I had questions too as to like, when was this following happen? Like when did that happen? Was it before? Was it after? Was it just a follow or a follow back? I had all those questions and stuff like that, but there were some that I just decided I probably shouldn't ask, considering the fact that he said he didn't vet anything. Like, what does it matter if you think it was before or after when you didn't actually vet this? So I just didn't ask those questions. But what he is saying that he did vet is the information that built the social map. So the social map itself, no. But what went into creating it, yes. So yours or mine, he used like our credit and like a credit check, all kinds of like background checks, including like a TSA background check. But like he uses all these things. They pull out little identifiers for one of us. And then those identifiers are given like a confidence range, 0 to whatever. The higher the number, the more confident they are that that is attached to you or I. And they're using those identifiers based off how high the confidence is, and they're inserting those. That's the Shadow Dragon software that he was showing me. It builds the map. He verified everything that he put into Shadow Dragon to build the map. He did not verify what came out of Shadow Dragon. Separately, though, there is a man named Daniel Clements. He is the owner of Shadow Dragon. And I do believe, if I am not mistaken, that he did the verifying of his own work and reported back to Steve Goncalves as such. I know that what's in the map is correct. And there's two parts to why the family believes that this is true. Because Andrew Garrett believes that what he put in to make the map is correct. And then the man who made the software to make the map also said, I did the work. And it backs up what Andrew Garrett says. He actually has like this whole thing on, I didn't even know LinkedIn was like a forum where you can post posts and stuff, but he actually has this whole thing on like LinkedIn, and it talks about how his Shadow Dragon software was used to create the connection between the defendant and the victims. And it goes on. He has an opinion as to what kind of person Bryan is. He compares him to like the Vegas shooter and the Austin bomber, someone with no motivation at all to commit these crimes. And this was all the way back in January of 23 that both of these things were existing. So it's not just that Steve saw this document and held on to that. It's that he's had a conversation that I have not had with another person, the man who made Shadow Dragon. Meanwhile, I had the conversation with the person who owns Garrett Discovery, who used Shadow Dragon. So if you were pulling together pieces, and it's kind of saying that the document's likely to be real, but he can't get anyone to pay attention.
Yeah.
And that's where that came from, basically. Now I know that this other person is also saying, I did my work and due diligence with my program as well. So I had a little bit more reason to reach out to Garrett discovery. But I didn't really want the interview myself. I actually thought that someone else could probably do it better. So I tried to give it to the interview room, but.
Well, if he's still interested in interviewing anyone, I would take that interview as well. A lot of interesting things, to unpack there. I wasn't aware of the shadow dragon or the confirmation or any of those things. That's highly impactful there. And I think that when you look at some of the claims already made by the defense team that there was no connection, I think this kind of waters down what they believe a connection could be. It is kind of like when they were saying that whole exculpatory stuff, like, oh, we have exculpatory things that they're hiding or whatever, and then we find out that it's they're looking for cameras that were in the corner of I-95 in Moscow and Palouse River Drive right there, heading south of Moscow, and they're saying that, oh, because there's no video of this car going through that intersection, that screams exculpatory, even though it's been reported there's multiple ways to get out of there without going through there. And so to me, it kind of just waters that down a lot, as far as what their claims are and their statements are. That's crazy. I mean, I would have thought that would have been found, though. I mean, that's the one thing that bothers me the most about this is, one, that it wasn't discovered, that it took somebody outside of law enforcement that doesn't have access into these things, typically, to locate, find this. And the fact also that it took, from the third week of April till here recently for them to finally start to investigate it. But that seems like what's the situation at hand, right? You were reached out. We were supposed to do an interview earlier. We had to reschedule it because you were reached out. And what happened with that, in your own words?
So it's actually a really brief story. So someone reached out to me and they're like, hey, just so you know, they actually warned me, download your video because they're looking at it and they're going to investigate that discovery document. And they didn't tell me if it was, one side or the other side, or if both sides were interested. I had no real information.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, but maybe you should probably just refrain from talking about this because you don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't even know who I would be doing a detriment to by talking about it. If everyone's investigating it, then I'm harming everyone. You know what I mean? So, and if it's the defense that wants to go back and look at it, I could be harming Bryan's defense. If it's the prosecution, I could be interrupting the actual justice that I'm trying to help the families find. So I just decided, like, maybe you're right. I'm going to refrain from talking about it. But at the same time, I didn't really know if they were serious. And I'm like, we'll see. Then I got the second message, which is the one that I sent you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I knew that, okay, the person that told me this earlier today is actually telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I took their word for refraining a little bit more seriously. That night, my fiance came home and I'm telling him what happened. And he's like, yeah, if I were you, I would exercise a little bit of respect, give those attorneys a chance to get their shit together if they don't have it together. And if you don't hear back, don't assume that doesn't mean nothing's coming from it. So even moving forward, still watch your mouth because you don't know what's going on. So right. I'm just trying my best not to, like I said, stop the justice from happening or do too much that causes Bryan to be railroaded. Okay. Mm-hmm. Whatever happens from this, I accept, whether it's that there is or is not a connection. My goal was to get somebody to look at it and make sure if there is or isn't before we move forward. I've done my job. So that's the best I can do.
Yeah. Yeah. And everything that they were, I guess, in question had to do more or less with the connection aspect, not so much with what he was saying, referencing phone pings and cast. Is that correct?
Yep.
So going to go ahead.
It sounds to me like the defense was already aware. Remember, he did the cell phone stuff at the defense's request. So they knew what they were looking for. They already knew what had gone wrong. They knew about, the fact that they needed to do more work on that cell phone stuff in order to be able to put Bryan in a specific place. The defense knew that. The prosecution was literally behind, which is exactly what Andrew Garrett said. The defense has the upper hand because they don't even understand that they did their work wrong. So the cell phone portion, I don't think we're anybody's benefiting from it except for the prosecution at this point. The defense already knew. They were on game with that. The prosecution was behind, and now they're benefiting from that. But at the same time, if there was a social media connection, even if it existed in the past and say before the attacks, it went away, like it was untethered, and Anne doesn't know about it, that's something that she now knows about. That's something that she can look into and make sure, was there a connection and you just unfollowed these people? Are you lying to me? Do I actually know what's going on here? As his defense attorney. So in both aspects, everybody has something that they could be digging into right now.
Yeah. You're absolutely right there. My question though, when it comes to like what he was saying. So first and foremost, going to what he was talking about as far as I know a lot of people thought that he may be taking shots at Cyree. I thought that may have been not so much the case. I think he was just being honest. But his honesty didn't just affect Cyree and his testimony. I think it also affected the prosecution in the way that they also used the equipment to locate somebody and how they locate people through this evidence. However, my biggest thing about this situation when it comes to the cast is and pings and locations is, that was used for the probable cause to arrest him, right? And probable cause, you don't need proof beyond reasonable doubt. You only need, more or less proof, right? And so that's why I thought that was important for the PCA. What I've been, ever since his arrest, and I knew they downloaded his phone, was wouldn't the GPS from the phone be more important than the cast information? And why is there such a huge spectacle on the cast stuff if there's the GPS information from his phone?
We should get back to that.
Okay. That's one we need to get back to. All right. Understood. We had a conversation before. All right. Yeah, because I mean, and I don't expect you to answer any of these. These are just kind of the things that I've put together in the past. I was like, look, when the Strava app came out and there was a warrant for the Strava app, I looked up what Strava was. And apparently Bryan Kohberger his profile was still attached to it. He was utilizing that tool in Pullman, Washington. It marked him running a mile in about 6 minutes, which isn't unimpressive. That's an impressive feat. I mean, he's run a mile in 6 minutes. That's pretty good. At the same token, that was a GPS location device on his phone. And so that I thought to myself, well, whether it be the 12 times that he's allegedly around that area or any of the movements that they have him recorded on using the cast would indicate that his phone was on. And if his phone is on, that means that the GPS stuff would be on and those things track. And they're already doing the Strava stuff. I don't understand the big question behind this, but the only thing, and this is just go ahead.
So I won't say what, and I won't say who, okay, told me. But I will say I was told that there was something done with the device that created a hardship in tracing back those GPS locations.
Interesting.
So I believe that plays a role in why Mr. Garrett, when he talks about GPS locations, specifically talks about the chip that's in all of our phones, that he helped with, the development of the software and creating the whatever it is that transmits the radio frequency. I can't even remember all of the detail, but there's a chip in all of our phones that his company has something to do with. And he did actually say that he would use that. That would be what he would use, the chip itself, to find GPS locations. So if they're not using the chip, I assume they're using something else. And whatever was done with the device is causing a hardship in the area they're trying to search for GPS locations. Mr. Garrett was specifically saying that would never be a problem with my chip. So they can't be looking at my chip. Also in the interview, I guess it kind of came out, but not necessarily straightforward. So we won't get back to that. I'll answer it kind of sort of now. There may have been something there that was causing some sort of deletion of information that is required to be able to find your locations. So that's kind of why at the end of the interview there, he says, I wouldn't be worried about deletion. I would be worried about overwriting the material. If you go and you download an absurd number of hours of video intentionally to override your phone, then I won't be able to find information. But anything that just deletes things, oh, I can go back and find that. But there's something else that they're doing. They're not looking at their little chip in the phone. They're looking at something else, maybe information off of paper documents. But something that was done with the device has caused a hardship, and it wasn't done by law enforcement. So something that was done with the device causes some kind of problem. They can't find GPS locations, if that makes any sense to you. It blew my mind. And for the entire week and a half that I was waiting to do the interview with Andrew Garrett, I had that like sitting on my mind. Like, what are they talking? What is this person telling me? How can that be? How can this person be told that and actually believe it? Like, I was losing my shit. But then he explained to me that there are things that exist that can delete pretty much everything you did on your phone. And they're utilized for when we get rid of a device so that we can make sure all of our personal information is gone so that we can pawn it or sell it, give it back to the phone company, whatever. But again, he said that literally shouldn't be a problem for the police. And because it is, that was another issue. That was another hot button subject that I think may have been extrapolated from that interview that people are now looking into.
Yeah. Yeah, no, most definitely. But wouldn't that, evidence of that type of activity also be kind of somewhat evidence of somebody trying to hide something?
Yes.
And so, I mean, even though if it's not there, then you find out also that his phone wasn't connected to the towers. And I'm sure they're going to be able to find out how or why. If it was manually turned off, there's a set of buttons that need to be pressed. I'm assuming that those would still be recorded, even if you overloaded things. If it was put in airplane mode, those buttons also need to be pressed. If you put it in like a Faraday cage or something like that, a dark bag, I think that would have an effect on it as well, where, and that may have been what he may have done. In my opinion, was probably the smartest thing to do, because it would still show that your phone is on, just not connected to anything.
Correct.
So it would mimic being in an area without service. So, that's what I'm assuming, that he had done that. And there's a lot of the things that I've kind of assumed, and I'll be honest about them. They are assumptions. These are my thoughts, theories. In fact, I probably should have done this earlier, but here's a disclaimer. I'm the Bryan Kohberger, is presumed innocent until proven guilty and things of that nature. Drink. But you mentioned like overloading with pictures and videos and things like that. I think there's two things to that. And I think I may have picked up on one of the things from the interview or maybe another interview that I saw, that a person can make it appear that you took a photo on a certain date or time by downloading it at a certain date or time, or whatever the case may have been. But you also just mentioned right now that a lot of photos, well, their deal in their alibi statement was that Bryan Kohberger took a lot of photos and took pictures and videos of his hikes and stuff. Wouldn't it also be odd
Did you catch that in the interview when Andrew Garrett also said, I know there are pictures and photos, they're not from the 13th, they're from other nights. I believe that was a part of the cell phone information that he has seen as well. So if he's seen it, then I believe it came from evidence, from the prosecution, from the law enforcement officers. So they should have known that those photos existed too. So I just wanted to know if you caught that he actually said that, and I believe he's seen them. I believe he's
Yes.
actually seen the photos and he looked at the metadata and stuff like that. So he knows the times and dates.
Yes, yes. Which made me believe that, and this is just my assumption of me putting two and two together, is that there was at least some sort of attempt to make a picture appear that it was taken that night. That was my take of it. And so even in that instance,
He told
even if
everyone what to look out for at both sides. He literally told them exactly what they needed to look out for. And I agree. He was saying that in some way, shape, or form, there was some kind of photo that was either, because technically you can also do it this way. If I took a picture, say I like flicked a picture out in the park 2 weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
And now today, I want to look like I was in the park. Pull it up on your phone and take a screenshot. And although it may say screenshot on some phones, it doesn't on all of them. It just provides you whole new metadata as if you had just taken that picture. So I think that was a part of what he was saying. Like, be careful. There are going to be some pictures in there that aren't even from the nights that you think they are, because the cell phone won't put him where that picture was taken on those nights.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. I saw that. And when I heard that, that's exactly where my mind went to. And then I went to what Ann Taylor's statement was, that there was pictures including in November. They specifically left out November 13th, though. Or just they specifically left out the fact that it was on that specific night. Just the fact that there was in November. So that tells me that I think they're going to try to say, if they can get away with it, that those pictures were that night. And if they can't, they're going to just say, oh, well, this is just proof that he took pictures, that he does go out there late at night. He's been in that area. So this is a pattern of his behaviors, so to speak.
Yeah. And I know that when it came down to like the NDA and stuff like that between Mr. Garrett and the defense, we didn't know until I reached out and asked, but he did sign one, and it covers the defense's work strategy, right?
Yes.
If they're going to try to say that old pictures were taken that night, that's a part of their defense strategy. So he wasn't allowed to come out based on the NDA and just straightforward say that, but he could have been beating around the bush, because he is allowed to ambiguously make these hypothetical statements, even if they fit directly in line with what her work strategy is, as long as he doesn't come out and say, this is what she plans on doing. So I wonder if we're picking up correctly on that.
Here's the thing. I guarantee this. The pictures, if there is pictures that ended up being said, this is my psychic thing that's happening. I like to tell people, because I can put a couple of things together and make things, predict things that are pretty accurate. These pictures are probably not going to be of anything of the sky, probably of the ground, probably of nothing that are going to be something that you can indicate date and time based on, star formations or satellite positions. So these pictures are going to be of the ground, probably of his feet, maybe even himself in a selfie where you can't see any of the sky or any of those type of things. Those are the type of pictures that I would expect to see. If you see one of the sky, I think that would be very, I think it'd be pretty easy to determine whether or not the time and place it was taken is accurate. Which, he's claiming he was stargazing, so you should expect to see pictures of the sky. So I hope that ends up being the case. We have 49er Girl with a $2 super chat saying both our teams lost last night. Yes, it's true. My team lost as well on Thursday night or Friday night. It was horrible. But it's just preseason. Last year, my team did really good in the preseason, and we stank it up in the first half of the season, so it don't matter. Are you a football fan? Not to judge too far or fall too far away.
Oh boy. Yeah, I watch football.
Who's your team? What team do you go for?
Jesus. I actually just like the Packers, and I get a lot of shit for it, but I like the Packers.
Well, it could be worse. I'm from Texas, so I'll tell you, I'm a Steelers fan, so There's a specific team that is my least favorite. I'm sure it won't be too hard to figure out. So you said he signed the NDA. He isn't allowed to talk about their defense strategies. He spoke about, let's see. Oh, one thing I wanted to talk to you about, since we mentioned about the profile thing. Some of the things that Bryan Kohberger has stated about himself in his past. One of the things, lack of remorse, lack of feeling like himself and everybody else are an organic sack of meat. Would that fall in line with what you would expect from somebody who would have committed a crime like this? I know that a lot of people tell me, oh man, just because he felt that way when he was 15 doesn't necessarily mean he's going to transition into this, which I agree, but how do you think that could play a role into this case?
I think that his personal views of himself is reflective of his lack of remorse. I don't think that his personal views that we heard of so far, like his own words, whether it be through the Tappa Talk or whatever, I don't think we've really fully grasped anything that says, I'm going to turn into a mass murderer, or I'm going to turn into a murderer. I'm not someone who thinks that just because someone who, has mental health problems, that they're bound to be a problem themselves. So even though I was like learning those things about Bryan as we went along, and, I still think I was like, I don't care. Like, okay, so he has some problems with himself, or he and his family didn't get along in his teenage years. Like, do most teenagers and their families get along in their teenage years? Like, so it was those things. And then I'm thinking about the fact that, like, now he's older, mom's concerned about him going across the country. So clearly their family life has gotten better, or it really wasn't all that bad to begin with. Dad's literally flying across the country to drive him back across the country. So it's got to have been an improvement, or it wasn't as bad as he thought it was to begin with. But as far as like, when I generally got an idea, once I got off the Jacks and the Jakes and the Joe Video and stuff like that, and I actually grasped what was going on here, it was December 10th of 2022 when they came out in the press conference and they said they had FBI across the nation looking into this. And I'm like, what? For the smallest town in Idaho? Like, are you kidding? Like, that's got to be a joke, right? So immediately I thought, this person's either transient or they left the area. And then I started thinking about those two options. Either you're transient and you didn't belong there, or you had somewhere else to go hide out. And why were you even there? And then that made me think, is this person someone who doesn't know these people and they just went in and attacked these kids? So my overall profile, I think, would pretty much describe just that, like a transient individual who didn't know these kids and they didn't know their attacker. But that was back then, before they arrested Bryan. Because when they arrested Bryan, I was like, I gotta have this wrong. He doesn't look like just a psycho. He doesn't look like a mass murderer. He doesn't look like a serial killer, or the individual who was even talking all that crap to me behind the name Papa Roger. So I literally developed and grew many, many times. That's just where it all came from. My profile was like a freaking rando, just a random, and of course it was a guy. I'd hate to say that, but the strength behind it. And then the swiftness of taking on not just the three individual girls back to back to back, but then also hitting Ethan and not being like so injured yourself that you're leaking on the way out. Like, I would imagine that if I were the attacker, little old me, girl, I probably would have at least had a boo-boo on my way out. So for me, it was like, this has got to be a guy. It's got to be someone who doesn't really belong there, was there for a short period of time and had a reason to leave, or went there to do this and then left. But overall, cold, callous, calculated. I told you I thought they were meticulous, but apparently looking back now, maybe not. But I thought they had been very meticulous. I didn't assume that it took like a super ton of training, but some self training to maybe teach yourself, where do you need to strike in order to make this possible, so that these people aren't jumping up, running out the room screaming, alerting other people, so that you don't end up in a situation where, even though you have this massive knife, you're getting jumped by everyone in the house. I assumed that this person was a little bit more meticulous than they were. But other than that, now what I think they're saying about Bryan, that profile probably does fit. But back then I didn't think it did.
Got you. Yeah, for me, I took I took the same approach everybody else did right off the bat. I thought it was Jack Core. Showalter is the guy that the grub truck, stuff like that. Not so much. I did think the ex-boyfriend, that's usually who it is. It's usually somebody scorned out of love, things of that nature, for people, stuff like that. It just seemed real in that direction. And as the case prolonged or continued to go without a suspect, I continue to tell people, it's like, the longer this goes, the further away this person who committed this crime is to the victims. Because it would be pretty apparent if it was the love scorned boyfriend, or if this was somebody who was a teacher who was afraid to lose her job. They got their phones, they got things that they're going to go through. There's video of the area. If somebody was visiting that area multiple times throughout, a couple of weeks that were leading up to him, or there was some sort of secret relationship, stuff like that, those things become pretty apparent fairly quickly. And so, after a couple of weeks go by, I'm like, well, maybe this is somebody, a little bit further out. And, by the time Bryan Kohberger got arrested, I was fairly positive the person that was going to be arrested was somebody we had never heard of. I was like, it's just so far away. We don't know who this person is. This is going to be somebody that's, not one of everybody's favorite suspects, blah, 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 blah. And when he came out and he got arrested, and I started looking into some of the things, and then, over time, I want to say probably took me about 5-6 months, maybe a little bit less, after his arrest, that I think I finally had, in my opinion, put almost a lot of the pieces together. I thought this was a guy who struggled with remorse and feelings. I don't know. I'm not familiar if that doesn't go away. Yes, not everybody that has those struggles turn into a mass murderer or any of those things, but I'm pretty sure most mass murderers have struggled with remorse or feelings of, those type of things. So it's just, to me, it's not necessarily everybody that is, has those problems, it ends up being, but those that have those, they end up being, usually have those problems. And, that added to it. But to me, the pieces of information that bothered me was, first thing that they used was the DNA on the sheath. That told me that there was no DNA anywhere else. There was no DNA underneath the fingernails. There was no sweat. Wasn't an eyebrow hair. There was nothing. So for somebody to go in there with a knife 4 times and commit this crime 4 times in close proximity to people without leaving any DNA told me that they went through a lot of planning. Second thing I hear is that you have the backsliding glass door was left open. Now, I know a lot of people said that it was the front door, but Chief Fry have said it on 2 different occasions that when officers arrived, that the door was still open. And when he was asked on 2 different occasions about the front door, and he says he has no idea of the front door ever being open or closed. So if it wasn't the front door that was open, it must have been the back door. And with my conversations with those that are close to the case, from what I understand, is that when the back door was open, it wasn't ever closed again. The killer went in, left it open, and left, and never touched it. My thought went immediately to, all right, well, there's no DNA on the victims. There's no DNA anywhere else. If this guy's doing that, it's probably because he's limiting the amount of times he's going to touch something to limit the amount of times that he could leave DNA behind. So whoever did this, really planned this out, very meticulous, found out about the audio 50 feet away, no sound of emotion, no sound of any of those type of things that I would have expected to hear from somebody who was love struck or roid ridden, those type of things. And, that started to make me think, okay, this person here, this is a serial type of offender, or at least the beginning of. the BTKs, the Ted Bundys of the world. Maybe not so much the motive in the essence of sexually motive, and maybe perhaps in some weird way it is sexually motivated. But finding out some of the conversations that he had, and as far as the Reddit questions and some of his interests and things like that, I honestly thought that this guy wanted to get into the mind of a criminal and know what it felt like. I mean, I think that's a lot of it, what it had to do. I don't think he had any, I didn't think he followed any of the girls. I'm actually quite surprised that he did. I thought that, choosing somebody that you don't know, that you may have met by happen chance somewhere, and following them from a distance would be the best way to keep yourself out of trouble. But so would not taking your phone or leaving the sheath behind or taking your own car. So those things add up as well.
I wonder if, as Bryan progressed through his schooling, he was doing really well, and he was learning about the criminal mind, but he was also learning about the why. So he was learning about the socioeconomic factors, the psychological factors, both the internal and external forces that create these serial killers and all kinds of criminals. And I wonder if he learned. I have that feeling. That one too. I also feel like that sometimes. And maybe he started relating very much to the likeliness of serial killers because he felt like he has a lot of those same feelings.
That's highly plausible. Highly plausible. I didn't think about that. One of the things he wrote when he was younger about having grand delusions or grand whatever, delusions of grandeur.
Yeah.
Yeah, he also, there was some text messages that were released between himself and a buddy of his, referencing him being in criminal justice and stuff like that, and his goal was to be involved in high profile murders. He wanted to solve them. He wanted to be the detective. He spoke about how it was going to be difficult, that those jobs are difficult to come by, but that's what he wanted to do. His life was falling apart. He didn't become a intern police officer twice for no reason. I think he had a lot of background issues. I think that played a big toll into the fact of why he did become an intern police officer in Pullman the first time around in the when he applied in the April of 2022. I would assume that he didn't get the job because he applied again in the fall, and it's been reported since then that he didn't get the position then either. A position that I think is a prerequisite or a requisite of the courses that he's taking. And he starts to lose his TSA job or TA job and things of that nature. And so I think that also played a huge pivotal role into why he committed the crime when he committed the crime. But if he was going to be stripped away from being in those high profile crimes as being the detective, so to speak, well, there's only two other roles that exist, and it's being the victim and the killer. And I don't think he wanted to be the victim. So that's kind of where I took a lot of what he was doing. I think the fact that this case is so high profile was an aspect of this. I think that there was a motive behind
Yes.
the high profile part of being a motive behind this case as well.
I agree. And I also, I believe that there is a social media connection. I don't know if that necessarily means that there was an actual connection between two parties, or if just one was linked to the victims. But aside from the social media connection, I do believe that these, or this, depending on the situation, these victims or this victim was specifically targeted for effect. They were specifically targeted because they were young, because they were beautiful, because they looked like the women that we pay attention to when they scroll across our screens and they're like missing, or, she was murdered. Would they look like the women we pay attention to? And I think this person wanted this. So they specifically chose someone that they thought, if you die, the world will pay attention. And we all did. And we all did.
100%. 100%. I'm going to answer a few of these or pull up a couple of things. We'll have a few minutes. I know we've gone a little bit longer than expected. So if you guys have any questions for Jasmine, please bring them up. Put a couple of stars. One of our newest members, Granny Ann is traveling, says the location of that house is awful for driving, stalking perspective. They typically like more than one entrance exit. Correct. Not necessarily. I mean, I think that if we put ourselves in that position, right, where the house is located, it's a one-way in, one-way out. So you know who's coming and going. Two, there's an elevated area that's a parking area right behind the house, and there's two ways in it. You can get in from the front or the back sliding glass door. And from the parking area in the back, if you were to just go sit there and park, one, it's disclosed, not many traffic going in and out, like I mentioned, one way in, one and out. So you're not going to see a lot of traffic there unless those are the folks that live there. And it's not weird to see a car parked back there. So I actually think that its location was pretty it was in favor of the suspect than it would have been for the victims. What are your thoughts on that?
I believe so as well. I've always told everyone, I live on a cul-de-sac, just like the students lived in a one-way in, one-way out. Technically, it was kind of supposed to be a circle, but they put those apartments up there. But I live on a cul-de-sac. We all know each other's business. There's only one way in and one way out. You can't pull onto our street without people noticing that you did. You can't leave my street without people noticing that you did. And there were a number of exits in the actual house. If the vehicle was in the back, I mean, yes, they had to drive back down the hill and past the house. But there were at least a number of ways out of the house. And I think that was the focus. I don't think this person's focus was even on how do I get off this street. I think it was how will I get out of this house? And there were many exits, many floor level windows, front door, back door, the upstairs slider on Maddie's side, low enough to jump off, so I think that there were a number of exits out of the house, and that was good enough for them. And they didn't think about the actual neighborhood. Off that street, though, there are a million ways to get out of there. Hence why we now have this problem in court where they're like, well, we thought he went down US 95, but obviously he didn't because we don't see him there. So that's how that happened. He left himself a number of options in the big ring. And he left himself a number of options in the house. But in the middle there, he was kind of blocked in. And in a situation where in most cases, I feel like many, many, many people would have seen, heard something. But maybe no one did. Maybe it all worked out for him in that aspect.
Yeah, it could have. I'm not sure if I ever showed you, and I want to say real quick, thank you to James Hollingsworth for being a newest member and his $5 super sticker. He had a great comment also a little while ago, but I wanted to thank him for his comment and his donation. But let me show you this real quick. I did this. I'm not sure if you've seen this. So this is a map that I created, and the exculpatory evidence that Ann Taylor claims that's out there is that there's a business here and right here that all show this highway. I think it's 95 down. And the probable cause affidavit states that he connects to a tower, around 448, somewhere between Blaine and Genesee. So somewhere around here. And they suspect that he's on this highway. Now, they're saying because there's no camera footage here, that this is exculpatory and that, he would have had to have traveled there. But there's multiple routes. You can go this direction here. And the crazy thing about going this direction here is, one, it's only, I think, 3 minutes longer than if you would have just gone straight.
Stayed on the highway.
Yeah. I don't know. I think people confuse Moscow and the size of the city with like maybe San Antonio. I think that this is miles apart.
I want to ask you what you think of this as the discrepancy with Blaine. Okay. So this whole route It does tell you that at about 4:48 a.m. he's supposed to be somewhere near Blaine, Idaho, right? That's 8 minutes down the road, and it took him 28 minutes to get there. He's not near Blaine, Idaho. He's just on the tower that's near Blaine, Idaho. He's actually 28 minutes out.
Right. I mean, see, the way I took it was that there's some time missing here. Now, I'm assuming because the following day he goes back and his phone turns off around Johnson again for about 5 hours. So my assumption was that he pulled off somewhere, disclosed of his, the weapon, his clothes, whatever he may have had in a bag, hid it somewhere, properly cleaned up a little bit, whatever may have been the case, and then taken back off and gone back on the road and still been, here within that, 18-minute time frame. Now, I highly suspect that the reason why his phone came back on, or whatever the case may be, is I think I don't know if there was Dylan or something. Maybe he knew, maybe he heard somebody yell, whatever the case may have been. But I think he knew that somebody was aware of his presence there. And I think he was trying to either give power to, or maybe he had on his phone, or maybe he needed a hotspot for some sort of dispatch. Reason being is, one, dispatch goes through Pullman, through Whitcomb, and him being access and criminal justice through the TA position there in WSU. I wonder if he had any access to some of the things, maybe even perhaps a radio. But I think that he needed to hear what happened. I think his curiosity killed the cat. I think that's why he took his phone out there. But if you travel this road here, there's no cameras until you get to Unionton, way over here. Now, that's if he traveled this road. I don't think they even indicate that he's on this road. They're just saying that this is the area that he most likely took. But if he turns his phone off the next day and he's in this area for 5 hours, I mean, isn't it plausible that he went back to go find the stuff he hid?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think we're kind of saying the same thing. So from 1122 King Road to Johnson, Washington is about 20 minutes. So when I tell you that at 4:48 a.m. he's pinging off the Blaine Tower, but he's somewhere else, I'm telling you he's somewhere near Johnson, Washington.
Interesting. I mean, you can get there. Obviously, look, so I drew in these lines here because I was like, he's heading this direction. And if his phone turned off, if he needed to get back over here, are there roads that travel from Johnson back this way? And there are. I mean, and this wouldn't take that long to get from here to there. You're absolutely right. It's taking about 10 minutes. That's 18 minutes or so is plenty enough time to get to Johnson.
And then be back there the next day. Like you said, it's just, there's no reason to go back, and I wonder if they know that might be the area he was in, and they just haven't told us that yet. They told us later in the PCA. See, in the PCA where they actually state that, they state that he was in Johnson, Washington, and that it is the same area he was in immediately after the murders, but they had never told us that before. They had never told us that he was near Johnson, Washington immediately after the murders until the end of the PCA when they made that one statement. And this makes it make sense. At 4:48 a.m., he was near Johnson, Washington. And then again the next night at 5:36.
So he talked about being something about forensics in the cloud and technical stuff. If he went hiking and he did all these things with these pictures ahead of time and all this other stuff, all right, he did all these things. And as you can see, Wallaway Park isn't that far away from Johnson, Idaho. I wonder if there's anything on one of those hard drives that shows him trying to see what coverage looks like on his phone if he's up in that park hiking. I'd be interested in seeing that because it's weird. But all right, so if he turns on his phone though at 4:48, and let's just say he's not over here by Unionton and he's not doing this big old loop and he's over here by Johnson, it takes him quite a bit of time to get from where they think he turned on the phone over here to get to Johnson. It's not that long of a drive. So what I'm saying is it wouldn't have taken him from 4:48 to 5:26 to pull into Pullman from Johnson, Idaho.
That is correct.
That's a significant amount of time.
But I do have, I'll send it to you in the aftermath, because I don't really have that much longer either. But I
Yeah.
do have an entirely different map route. It goes straight through Johnson, straight into the park, and then back to WSU, and it takes an hour and 10 minutes, which is exactly how long it took him, from 4:20 until 5:30.
Interesting. All right, yeah, I want to see that. I'd appreciate that. I'm just gonna just kind of go through this real quick, make sure I don't see anything that anybody's asking real quick. No, I don't see anything there. Let me thank you so much, Jasmine, for coming on. I appreciate if you're not following Frenzy, here's the channel. 3.73K subs. Let's get that up. A lot of good stuff. Talks about the homage paid to Ted Bundy, which I'll be honest with you, I called that almost a year ago, if not further. Just want to let everybody know I've called that one, Mr. McDonough. You should give me credit for that, sir. But go follow, go subscribe. We have any final words from you or anything like that you'd want to say to everybody?
In fairness, I think I've said plenty. I am me, guys. I'm just me. I'm just like everyone else. I'm just like all of you guys. I didn't do anything special with the Garrett discovery document that, other people couldn't have done. I even waited various months hoping that anyone else would, jump in and do it. I am only here to help, and it's not intended to make Bryan Kohberger look like a bad person. I do just try to report what I find as truth. So it's not to shun him. It's just to report my best truth that I can find. When it comes down to people that are like, is she some kind of FBI agent? I laugh at that because absolutely not. I'm just a regular person. Then there are some that are like, well, is she part of the family? I've actually been accused of being Steve's niece through the brother who's in prison. I'm not related to the families. None of that. I have put together a lot of information over time that I think has slowly been introduced to law enforcement, the FBI, the prosecution, and I think that over time, they just decided to go back and look at some of the stuff that maybe they didn't look at to begin with. But none of it was like I dug anything out or anything like that. I just kept harping on the things that they weren't paying attention to. And that's how I got their attention. I'm here. This is the only thing that I do talk about so far. But down the road, someday, our channel will grow into many other things. I do have a dedication to seeing whether or not Bryan Kohberger is found innocent or guilty, so that I can find out if he's innocent or guilty of being Papa Roger and stuff like that. But there's still a good amount of me that, although I insist that most of the evidence makes Bryan look guilty, there's still a good amount of me that is actually open to whatever Ann Taylor has to say. Whatever she has to say. If it sounds ridiculous, I'll just take it as she's making, the best argument for her client. If it sounds decent and it is something that is believable, don't think I won't, heed it and at least consider if Bryan Kohberger did or didn't do this. But as for right now, I'm pretty much in the same boat as you. It looks like he did. And I can't make myself believe that it looks like he didn't, because it looks like he did.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there. I am also open to something that's reasonable, that makes sense. At the same time, I've talked to people about it multiple times. Like I thought I was on the fence before, and then as more information and evidence came forward, it's less likely that he's not done, that it's not going to end up being him. I do think that I am open. Let me rephrase this. I am open to something that is there, but I do not really think that there will be something there, because given the information there, it would just kind of not make logical sense. But if something were to come out, that hey, this is what they're saying, I would investigate it to the fullest to see if there's truth to it or not, to the best of my ability, obviously. If they're saying that, hey, he was over here, and there's eligible ways of seeing other people, or even if there's maps to determine the possibility of him being one place or another, what I'm saying, those are the steps that I can take. But I personally don't think there's going to be something out there that comes out, which is why I do say I am biased in this case. I don't, I think in the last conversation that I had on the show, or one of the last ones. I think it was with True Crime Time and Jeff. Both of these guys said that they think that they feel that they could go on the the jury and not be biased. And I'll be honest, I couldn't. I would be open to something, but I just don't see it being possible. For something to be there. But I think I picked up on something that you had said that I want to ask you off air. So thank you for joining. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you, all your viewers, for putting up with me for the last hour and 40 minutes.
It's been a good one. And one last thing I want to say, happy birthday to a very special person out there, to my wife. We're gonna be celebrating that. Happy birthday. We'll see you soon. Peace out, guys. Until next time.